And maybe if I do read it, we'll do a Maria's sequels thing
She's
finally.
been talking about doing that for a
I
year and a
know.
half, guys.
I know.
It's
It's
not gonna
crazy.
happen.
Now that I live with my boyfriend and I don't have to like go see him
In Sin?
unwed, I should actually have more time to give to like other stuff. So because I would like to do it. Don't shake your head at me, William. Hi, guys, and welcome to another episode of your favorite podcast, Unresolved Textual Tension. It's me, Maria, and today with me, my ruggedly handsome co-host, William. He wanted me to intro this in Spanish, because today we were reading a Spanish book. Is Nancy Farmer? It's called House of the Scorpion by Nancy Farmer. Is she Spanish?
I just saw on her Goodreads that it said she grew up, like, in that area, so I don't know if she actually is or not. Nancy Farmer obviously is not a Hispanic name, and she looks like a white lady, but there's a lot of white Hispanics. The reason I wanted Maria to speak a little Spanish is because, you know, we do representation on this podcast, and we never get to read any Hispanic books because someone doesn't choose them.
William
And
chooses the books. It's William. If you think Katie and I ever choose books, you're out of your goddamn mind.
Inked in Blood! Fate Inked in Blood was your guys' one choice, and you ruined it.
You gave us two options. You didn't say, hey, do you two want to pick a book to read? You said, here are two books, pick one, and I picked the shortest one. So, fuck you, William.
And guess what? How did that choice go? As I always say,
Terrible.
heavy weighs the crown, pendulous swings the dick.
Oh,
So,
God.
and the reason I wanted her to speak Spanish is because Hispanic authors, and I do this as a Hispanic writer, have this weird habit of just putting in Spanish words, like not randomly, but they have to include them in a way no other culture feels necessary to do. You don't see this with like German authors don't suddenly put in a bunch of German words or something.
That one book did it. What's it called? Starlight Thief, Stardust.
Well, that was more like camel metaphors that it thought would be fun to just stick in.
Yeah, but
randomly.
it had.
No, it had some like hellos and goodbyes and whatever.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know which language. But yeah, so that's why I wanted her to start with
Arabic?
Bienvenidos a nuestro podcast, Irresoluto Textual Tensión. But because people have said this, let's start out actually, before we give our main opinions, with the premise. Maria, what is the premise of this book?
So, first off, I think we should give a little bit of our history with this book. This book, I think, fits beautifully. Sorry, I'm taking
I just
over.
said the thing and you were like, no.
It's not opinion. So this book is in our nostalgia reads. This is a book Will and I both read as kids. You didn't read it as a kid? When did you read it?
I hadn't read it. I had like the copy I got from a bookstore, and then I never read it because it sounded too depressing, but I kept being like, oh, I want to read this.
Okay.
And I never did, and that's how, yeah.
So this is a nostalgia read for me. I read this as a kid.
I'd read another book by Nancy Farmer called The Ear, the Eye, and the Arm, which I actually hadn't known until I looked up this time that it was the same author, and she's that book always really impressed me, and so I'm like, oh, okay, that makes sense. This is like a very similar kind of book.
Yeah. So I read this when I was a kid, and so I was actually really excited because it's been a long time. I think I read it the year it came out. Someone needs to look up the year it came out to fact check that. But
2002.
Yeah, that checks out then. I'm pretty sure I was in 5th or 6th grade then.
You would have been like 10.
Yeah. No, I was very young, so much so that I remember bits and pieces of this book. Like, I have a vivid memory of, like, the start of it and, like, the plantation and the opium fields and all that stuff, but I couldn't remember the exact things that happened. But I remembered finishing the book as a kid and being like, man, I can't wait for the sequel to come out. And then I never read the sequel because I just forgot it existed. So this definitely fits into like a childhood read. And the exciting thing is this is a YA book that is for kids. Like you could read it as a 5th grader, you could read it as in 6th grade, you can also read it as an adult and get stuff from it. It's one of those books where the author writing it is not pulling punches. She's not assuming kids are dumb. She is giving kids a level of intelligence, and we rarely get YA like that. It is either YA masquerading. It is either books written for 30-year-old women masquerading as young adult, or I feel like it can be very pandery, and this is not. It's great. It's a good time But yeah, so I think it fits in the nostalgia read category. I was very excited to see Will do it. And now I will talk about the premise.
I don't know why you didn't just do that first. I'm just going to cut it in before
Oh my
your
god.
spiel.
Well,
People
I
have
think
told me that we need to get started sooner.
fair. Anyway, the premise of this book is a kind of I wouldn't say post apocalypse, but it's a bit of a dystopian future where a huge chunk of the Mexican and American border has been turned into a separate country that is ruled by drug farmers and drug lords. And our story starts with a young boy living in a house in the middle of a poppy field, and he is a clone for the head drug lord of this country that they've named Opium. And it is
Let's see
his
which of us can do his name better. You first, because you have very good pronunciation when it comes to
Mateo
foreign words.
Alagran.
No, what's the main bad guy called?
That's his name, Mateo Alagran.
No.
El
That's the main
Patron.
character. All right.
Yeah,
El
but that's
Patron.
El Patron's
El
name.
El Patron.
El Patron is named
Oh,
Mateo
see, you did the
Alagran.
L sound instead of L. Mm,
Oh
tisk,
God,
tisk, tisk. Go ahead.
get out of here. But anyway, and this is a world in which there's a lot of things that are futuristic, but because of El Patron's nostalgia, nostalgia for his childhood, he has made it so, like, at first it's a book where you're really unsure about what the time is, what the technology is, but there are clones, and clones are used as organ harvesters, and normally they're lobotomized at birth, but El Patron likes to have his smart, and we get to the story starts where you are in the point of view of this clone named Matt, living his life, not knowing what he is, not knowing his fate at all, and kind of the traumas and terrible things he goes through discovering what he is, how people react to him, and kind of overcoming his situation. And that's the premise of the story.
Yes. So as Marie was saying beforehand, and I may have cut that before this part, so we'll see in editing. I didn't really want to have to edit this that much, but Maria has decided to go rogue. This is the problem with feminism. I had not read this as a child because I thought it was going to be too depressing.
You were
But
right.
it, and the thing is, the first half is, and I think this is probably, I should state up front, I very much liked this book. I liked listening to it. I enjoyed listening to it. I wanted to listen more. I liked the characters. I like a lot of the little grace notes she puts into her writing, and world building and characters. And it's much more intelligent. And like Maria was saying, it's written in a different mode than modern YA. Modern YA is, and you'll just forgive me for making generalizations, 30 to 40-year-old women writing their ideal boyfriends with wish fulfillment and some smut. And that is not this mode of YA. This mode of YA is 30 to 40-year-old person, either gender or none, and they're writing to children. And they don't think the children are dumb, but they are writing to them. They're not like kind of, well, they're writing. You know what I mean? You didn't see that part. They're not like, writing doing that while they write, which is kind of the feeling you get from like a throne of glass, or even an ACOTAR, even though ACOTAR technically isn't, but it's basically like YA. YA right now is more of like a weird polyp left after romantasy. But anyway, so this book is written in sort of a slightly distant tone. It also, I think one of the reasons it really worked for me is that I went in, the book sets its expectations really well. You kind of get the sense right from the beginning that this is going to be a bit of an allegorical or metaphorical book. The world building is not going to be super accurate, but it's trying to make a point in the same way that you wouldn't like be like, well, a wolf can't blow down a house in the story of the Three Little Pigs. And like not to that extent, obviously, but this is a book that sets its expectations very early, I think. And I think that helps it a lot. I think that works less well in the second half. And I think the first half of the book sets up a very dark, serious story that then becomes more YA as the book goes on. And like I kind of understand why, but it was sort of disappointing to read.
I agree. Less for me because I didn't find it less dark, but I do find it a really big genre shift. I would agree with that, where the first half feels like one type of story, and then in the last third, you get a different type of story. And I think something like that can be solved really easily by making it a separate book. This book has a clear break point where it could have gone from a book one to a book two, and then you could have made this a trilogy because I think it is a duology, and kind of lengthened out what happened in that last third to make it its own compelling book. And bring a little bit more of the darkness because I still found it quite dark, but it just like it was kind of like in Harry Potter where when they leave the school and you're like, but the school was what we were here for, and
Yes.
that location change is a little bit of a like letdown. It was a little bit of that, and part of that is you're right. The author does such a good job setting up the sense of place and
Hmm.
presence of the first two thirds that the last third, even though it was like it on its own could have been a cool like location, it just wasn't as compelling and it was a little bit more done in a YA sense. And we'll get into that. But overall I did enjoy this book. It was super readable. It had good characters. It's one of those books where the stakes for the majority of the book are small. It's the stakes for this one character and the people he loves. And it's not world ending stakes. And sometimes I find with a lot of YA or fantasy books that or dystopian books, the stakes are really fucking high for a lot of things. And in the last like 10 pages, the stakes get a little bit high, but it's resolved so quickly you don't feel it. And I think that's why moving this as into a trilogy would have really helped with the increase in the stakes. But I love, and I've spoken about this before on this channel, I like small stakes, kind of interpersonal stakes and issues and stuff like that. And the first two thirds of this book is just, you have complex characters. You have characters who love people that are bad but have been good to them, and like the complex feelings about that. You have uh, a curandera who is just like mwah, mwah. Celia is just, I love her so much. She is, if I
You can
feel
tell
her
she
in the
was
heart.
written by like a middle-aged woman who was like, "No, we're gonna make her a badass."
Yeah,
I identify with this character.
but the thing is, the start of the book, you think she's gonna be a throwaway character for a
Yes,
little
that's
bit.
true.
There's literally a couple moments where you think this character, and she isn't, and she's got this like premise, like not this premise, sorry, I Miss Allie Snow just made a comment and it said the premise is very dark, and it just like my brain just malfunctioned. But she's got like this rod of steel in her and this like strength that is so fantastic to see. And her and Tamlin developing their relationship, it's just, it's so good. This book is like has so many good things. I do think it fails a little bit with a couple of things. Obviously the last third feels like a bit of a letdown. Some of the beats I think are a little hard, and there is a couple of moments where you want a, it's almost too much bad all at once. Like you need a couple of moments to breathe a little bit, which it eventually you get to some breathing room, but like for a chunk of it it's just a little much. Um and the unveiling of the world and how fucked up it is really nicely done. Not a perfect book, but an enjoyable read. I really
And so much more intelligent than basically everything else we read on this channel. It's unfortunate that this video will do extremely poorly in the alg.
terribly.
It's going to be doing so bad. It's sci-fi. It's an old book. We actually kind of like the book, so no one will read it. But you know, we're here for you, our patrons, because our patrons really pay our way much more than ads. But when I say patrons, do I mean the Da Vinci's? Do I mean an old Venetian house? Like, what do I mean when I say patrons, Maria?
So it is similar in where we are the Da Vinci's being supported by our patrons, but through a specific platform. We have a Patreon, ba 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 ba, a cool place that you can join and join cool people and support us, cool people who like to do this but also need money. Unfortunately. Oh no. Such is the world.
Capitalism.
Capitalism! Um, but our Patreon has 3 tiers. Our starter tier, which is our just standard patron tier, you get to join our cool Discord where there is lots of cool channels and you can talk to people. If you're a writer, we got a ton of writers. It's a cool place filled with cool, sexy people. You should join. Have a good time. We're there. I lurk often, but don't comment a ton. I'm most active on like the pet channel.
She showed feet this morning there, which I told her we have a different channel for that. Don't be
Oh,
a
I
wanton
forgot.
whore.
I forgot.
Yeah. I'm more active there. I'm actively building a cult. I want sister wives. I want devotees. I want to go and live with like clean linen in the woods. It is a vibe. But on our Patreon, you get access to that Discord. You get access to book club live streams. This is one of those. This is a mid-month one, which is one that I pick. But once a month, we pick, you guys pick one through a poll. You'll nominate books, and then you'll do a poll on it. And on our final tier, you get access to me and Katie's critique streams, where we look at the micro of prose and how an author creates like a feeling or a vibe and what's good and what's bad. And then also Katie has been running a critique group of her own called Katie's Fiction Corner, KFC. And those, you don't have to be part of that to get your work looked at. She picks those on those her own, but to get access to the streams both during and after, you'll have to be part of that tier. And also, I am announcing something for those of you who we might call pros, the Egypts of this book. I will be releasing Will's Hour of A Song of Ice and Fire for the free tier on Patreon. So even if you have no money, go follow us over there. You can do it for free. And I will be releasing those videos for you guys there. So that's, if you want to see the kind of micro writing or me just talking about A Song of Ice and Fire, my one obsession, you can just join for free.
Join the Patreon, or if you can't, comment, like, subscribe if you haven't. If you're here and you haven't subscribed, and any of you, listen, I know you exist. I've seen you. You watch a ton of our videos. You don't subscribe, and you've watched like 4, and you're like, wow, this is pretty good. Do they ever like books? And then maybe you don't actually watch this one because it's not going to do well, and so
I was gonna say this is not the video to do it.
Your For You page is not going to like send this to you. But if you happen to have gotten here somehow and you're not subscribed, subscribe. We upload every Friday, and it's a good time.
All right, do you want to jump into the plot?
This book starts with a fantastic opening, which is a guy in a lab who is working off of, I think, 34 or 35 embryos. And you're not really sure what they are, what's happening, and he has cells and he has to turn them into embryos, and then once they're embryos, they get implanted into cows, and these cows, and this is your first little taste that something in this world is off. The cows have chips in their brain that make them just happy. Their limbs are being moved by machines, and they're implanting these babies, these little embryos, into the cows. And there's this great line where he says, if the cows were angry at their existence, he didn't know, but they must have been, this isn't a word quote, exact quote, but they must have been, because they kept rejecting the embryos one by one until there was just one left. And the guy is wrecked with anxiety that he has to get these embryos to turn into like a living baby, and he's anxious, and he knows that if it doesn't work, he's going to lose his job and lose his life, and you think die. And then there's the one baby, and there's a scene where he's like, he caught the baby as if it was his own daughter, and he goes to blunt its mind, lobotomize it, and somebody stops him and says, no, this is one of Alagran's. He never has his lobotomized. And you're like, ooh, what is this? Like, is this a son? Is this a, like, what is this? Why are they lobotomizing these children? Why is Mr. Alagran's not being lobotomized? What is happening? And he thinks, as he looks down at this baby, Have I done you a favor, or will you grow to resent me? And then you never see this character again. You don't need to, it's fine. But it is such a powerful opening because there's this sense of dread, this sense of fear, this you immediately know there's technology here that we don't have. And the next thing we get to is a boy named Matt who is I think like 5. He's 6, 5 or 6. He's young.
He's young.
Um, and he lives in a house in poppy field, and he's taken care of by this lady named Celia. And she loves him, takes care of him, dotes on him, but for huge chunks of the day, she's just missing. She tells him about the big house where she is the cook for this big rich family that he is not allowed to go see. He cannot leave this little house. The windows are nailed shut. Um, and she tells him that if he ever sees anyone, he must hide. And he hates that she has to leave. There's a closeness, but there's also a distance. There's this point where he calls her mama because he watches TV, and the little kids refer to the lady that takes care of them as mama. And she's like, I'm not your mother. And there's a sense of sharpness to it. And you're like, what is the situation here? Eventually, one day while Celia is out doing her stuff at the big house, some kids show up. They've obviously gone out into the poppy fields, and he hears them, and he doesn't hide, and they see him, and they're like, oh, there's a kid out here. Oh, this is Celia's cabin. She must have had a kid that she was hiding. And the one kid says, oh, well, everything belongs to dad, so I'll tell someone. And there's a girl there, and she's like, don't say anything. And then they leave, and because they try talking to Matt, but he doesn't say anything. He's not used to talking to a ton of people.
That would be my reaction as well. That's how I am
Yeah.
with strangers.
He's so fascinated, and he's so excited. As much as he was terrified in the moment, he's so excited that he practices what he's going to say if they should come back. And he doesn't tell Celia. And then a couple days later, they come back with a younger girl who's closer to his age, and they're trying to talk to him and coax him out. And he can't, like, the words are stuck in his mouth. He can't get it out. And eventually they're gonna leave, and he doesn't want it to happen, so he uses a chair and he breaks the window. um and he tries to jump out so he can go hang out with them, and he says like, hi, my name's Matt, do you want to play? And he jumps out, and he gets shards of glass stuck in his feet, and the kids are like, oh crap, oh god, we have to take this kid back. So they carry him back to the big house. He's never seen anything so beautiful in his life. He's in pain, but mainly in shock, so he doesn't really feel it. And then they bring him into the big house, and there's this one servant named Rosa who is helping remove the shards of glass out of his feet. And then one of the girls sees something written on his foot, and they wipe the blood away, and it says, property of Mateo Alagran. And everybody realizes and starts calling him a clone and starts acting real disgusted. Like, a man comes in and is like, how have you defiled my house? Get this creature out. And he was literally on a couch being tended with care and like basic human decency, and they just throw him outside into the courtyard. Just throw him out. And he's like, what's a clone? Am I a clone? What is that? I don't understand any of that. And you as a reader immediately are like, oh, this is something terrible that is happening. And you begin to understand that whatever his fate is as a clone, it ain't a good one.
No, and so I think this is a good time to stop and talk about the world building in this book, because there is a moment where you're like, that's kind of a strong reaction for people to have to just him being a clone. Like, they literally just start seeing him as an animal and treating him as an animal. And you're like, okay, I get it. It's social commentary. But the thing is, it actually kind of worked for me. And I think I wasn't quite able to put my finger on why. I think there's several reasons. But one was that Courtney in our Discord wrote that the world building in this book is not macro to micro, it's micro to macro. So instead of the world being introduced and the character within it, being a piece within it, in this, there's a character and then there's the world around him. And so a lot of the world building is done through the fact that Matt, hate my Spanish blood when it makes me do stuff like that. Like I just had to pronounce it in the most Hispanic way possible.
Oh my God, you poor baby.
A lot of this book is filtered through Matt's childish understanding of the world, and
Hmm.
so you kind of see things in like the side, there's a word
Periphery?
for it, the
Periphery?
periphery, right? And you kind of understand it, but he doesn't quite, and you're like, oh, okay, cool. And that's kind of what I think that whole micro to macro versus macro to micro makes sense. Is that this is a story about Matt, and the world exists to support that. It is not necessarily a work that has a world and then they decided to put someone in it, a la Lord of the Rings, for example. And the other thing that I think works about the writing is that it's dealing with a very real, like all the characters feel very real, and also their racism against clones feels very real because they otherwise are actually quite nice to people. Like they were quite nice to him when they thought that he was a person. They
Yeah.
have like relationships with each other that they're nice in. It's just like, oh, he's the kind of person I don't like. I'm gonna flip a switch, and all of a sudden he's not, and that's actually very human. And the other thing is, again, this book feels a little bit like parable-y. So you understand that, like, oh, the author's making a point here. It's not necessarily supposed to be 1,000% of
Yes.
verisimilitude. So
And Miss Allie Snow made a point that I saw her make in the her final thoughts, I think it was. I think it was yours, Allie. The vehement prejudice against him being a clone didn't really work for me, especially after the revelation at the end. And it's like, okay, now that El Patron is dead. And I have to say, one of my
El
problems.
Patron. El
Oh my God!
Patron is a deer.
Jump off a bridge. Um, the ending and the way that worked on a legal basis didn't love how the ending of the book I find is one of the weakest points of it. And the thing is,
Mm-hmm.
I don't dislike the setup for the next book. I just dislike a certain mechanic she did at the end that Ali is completely correct about, that kind of undermines some of the other stuff that's happening. And because I do like, for the most part, the way people treat clones, especially when you realize how, like, to build a society, and basically what the clones are, we'll just talk about it here, is wealthy men who are very powerful and don't want to die keep swapping out their organs with clone organs. And the clones are defined, because you can't have two people who are the same person, defined as livestock, thus enabling this to be allowable.
Because
And
they're born from cows, which is a bit of like legalistic um mental gymnastics that I actually kind of really liked, in that, like, oh yeah, no, that does feel like a dumb reason somebody in the real world would come up for why
yeah.
clones aren't people.
And also most clones, as we mentioned, are lobotomized, and so they're uh and they don't even just say it's not actually a lobotomy. Like their brains are kind of like fundamentally destroyed in a
Mm-hmm.
way that feels like they're injected with something that
Catatonic
eats,
almost.
yeah, that eats at their brain and turns them into, like, there's a there was a great chapter title which was like the mewling thing on the bed as a chapter
Oh God,
title,
that
and
was,
it is,
yeah.
it's just crazy. And so there's very much this sense of humans are the value of their mind, because we're going to meet the Egypts, which we'll talk about. Um, and this is done to clones so that there is no, like, moral argument against harvesting them. But El Patron likes his clones not brain destroyed,
Or not
and
all of them. He does have some brain destroyed
yeah,
ones, but he also has others that are not.
that he likes to have raised as a person. um and so there is this kind of like dark sinisterness, and you as a reader pick up on a lot of this real quick. Immediate when you first meet El Patron, he's like 140 and you're like, something is shifty afoot, and you're putting together, and one of the things this book does really well is you put together this stuff and then you fear for Matt, and you're like, Matt, put it together, come on, buddy. And so there's this nice, I think it lasts a little too long, I think you should have put it together a little bit earlier, but the idea of trying to avoid it, I think you could have done it better, like trying to avoid the realization.
I think you're right. I think there should have been a little bit more mental gymnastics on his part as he nears the idea and then comes up with a reason why it isn't true. Something like that. The other thing, though, is that like Matt's like 12 for most of this book, so it does kind of make sense that he's not really that plugged in. You know what I mean? This is not like a
Hmm.
character who's a mini adult. This is a child and he thinks like a child, which I think kind of helps with the
Yes.
believability a little bit.
It's a really nice setup, but basically he's discovered as a clone, and there's a doctor who would visit him with when he was living in the house with Celia. But now that everybody knows that he exists and where he was, they don't let him go back to the house with her, and he is put in a room and kind of kept as an animal. And there's this lady, the one servant Rosa put in charge of taking care of him, and she is very disgusting towards him. This is one of the moments that was like, you're like, oh god, this book is going to be dark, but it was one of those times where it almost bordered on a bit much, like a bit heavy-handed, I would say.
I disagree. It really worked for me because Rosa's, and you have to roll the R, Rosa's way of oppressing him really felt very real to me in that it starts off with like, she just doesn't like him, but then she starts really disliking that she's the one who has to take care of him.
Take
It's
care of
made her
him.
lower in the totem pole of servants. And so she starts taking it out on him over time. And that to me felt like such a realistic, non-mustache twirling way of presenting an evil
And
character.
I'll agree, especially like her romance with the doctor, who was apparently just a womanizer in general. um like there is a sense that she just has this growing bitterness towards Matt that gets worse, because at first she's not treating him terribly, and then the more people, you're right, isolate her because she is dealing with the clone, there's this sense of dirtiness about being in proximity to him. um the more she becomes crueler to Matt, and eventually, like, we'll kind of summarize it. He ends up She throws chicken sawdust, like,
Yes.
just in there. And there's this one moment that I do want to highlight, because it's such a moment of the inhumanity of it. There's this point where, like, there's a bucket that he's supposed to pee in, and he gets scared, like something startles him, and the bucket falls over, and so it gets on the floor, and he has to sop it up with the newspaper. And Rosa is like, "Oh, you are an animal. You can't, like, you're
Hmm.
disgusting. You can't even use." And it's just like this, people are seeing into this what they want, and not looking at the context of it, which is something that regularly happens when humans are being fucking prejudiced
People are
assholes.
like, that's weird. Why are they acting like an animal when I have reduced their living conditions to so? And the other thing is, I think this part is kind of very indicative of how Farmer writes. And we'll explain sort of some of the end of the book in that I think what she likes to do is create an environment. Her characters go into the environment and she really explores all the small facets of the environment. And so in this small chicken, well, cell essentially, he becomes lord of it, so to speak. He hides things in the bottom of it. You really get a sense of like, oh, this is the area, there's a little ecosystem that he plans out, and like, this is cool here, and it's a good way of showing the isolation and what that does to him. And it works when we're doing it to the hacienda as a whole, because you're like, oh, this is so creepy and weird. But then she wants to go do it in other places. Like she wants to do it in the orphanage at the back end of the book. And you're like, okay, but I wanted to stay in the other place. Whereas her interests are in exploring these different little biomes.
I completely agree. And that's why having it be its own book and setting up the orphanage biome, I think would have worked better that way. Like having this book complete, like start and end. And I like the idea of that, starting in this book here, ending it with him leaving, having the second book being the biome, and not just that, but also him exploring the rest of the world, like
Hmm.
having interactions with other things, and then the third book being him returning and having to deal with I think would have been a really smart decision. But anyway, um as Will said, he kind of becomes the king of the sawdust. He's friends with the roaches. He saves food to feed things. There's some doves that come in, and he just, like, he is a child left to his own devices, and he entertains himself. But through this, he loses speaking. Like, he doesn't talk to anyone, and so he just stops talking. And you're introduced here. There's a point earlier where there's kids that exist in the hacienda at random times, and one of them is an asshole named Tom. The little girl that saw him in the beginning is Maria. She's gonna come up a lot, but there's this kid named Tom, and he's an asshole, and he looks really cute and adorable, but he's a jerk. And he comes, and he knows Maria. Maria told him, hey, there was a little boy. Everybody started acting real mean to him after they found out he was a clone. And because Maria was the only one after finding out he was a clone that was still like, hey, you want some food? Nobody gave you food. Are you okay? And she kind of starts thinking, she's like, everybody's saying you're like a dog, but like my dog's cool and I like him, and sometimes people don't feed him, and so I smuggle him food, so I'm gonna smuggle you some food too. As a chatty, curious child, I felt Maria real hard.
Because you are Maria.
Yes.
So no, I thought Maria, not ours, that one. Originally I was like, oh, this is like a little bit too much of like, why doesn't she have the same view of clones as the rest of her family kind of a thing, and like it was a little too precious. But I actually really like what the author does with her as the book goes on, in terms of like, oh, she's nice to him, but she's nice to him because she kind of thinks he's a dog. And like,
Yeah.
that's kind of the thing.
It's so great. The book is really fantastic in that Maria does exist in this world, and while she does have a lot of sympathy for like creatures that like there's a point where she rescues three-legged cats, her development from seeing Matt as a poor sad creature that she's going to take care of, like her dog that everybody else hates and thinks is disgusting, to seeing him as an actual human is so well done, because there are multiple points where you're like, oh yeah, Maria just views him as a thing in a lot of ways, and she likes him, but she views him as a thing, and so the development of that is great. But anyway, Maria told Tom to check up on Matt. Tom's like, oh, you're a clone, and starts hitting him with a pea shooter, so Matt has to like go diving in the sawdust. And then eventually Maria comes back, she finds Celia, and they find Matt, and Celia, she's like, oh my god, what have they been doing? And she informs this kind of, throughout the entire first part of the book, you hear about this guy, El Patron. El Patron. People are talking about him, but he's not there. He's kind of this mythic figure. And then he shows up, and he has Matt taken out of the stuff. They have to clean him up. And El Patron is like, what the fuck have you done with my clone? Like, why are you treating him like an animal? And the doctor, who has known about this the whole time, is like, oh, yeah, he's malnourished. And previously he was like, oh, the kid looks fine. It's fine. And he pins everything on Rosa. And Rosa is taken away. And you're like, oh my god, what's going to happen to her? Is she going to die? And El Patron is like, let me see you, and he's trying to talk to Matt, but Matt is not at the point where he's talking. He's still very silent. And from this point on, Matt has a different standard of living, a much better one. He's not taken back to the house with Celia. They're given a suite of rooms in the hacienda, where they get to live, and he's given a teacher. He's also given, to make sure people don't fuck with him, a bodyguard from one of El Patron's bodyguards. And he has two choices. It's, what's the other one's name? It's Tamlin and Daft Donald.
Because the El Patron had got them from Ireland, I think it was. And he always says like, oh, always pick your bodyguards from another country, because then they have no ability to fight you here. And this is so true. Roman empires used to do this.
They can't make alliances. They can't, they have no alliances to go on.
All their power is owed to you, which is a real thing. Now, here's the thing. El Patron is a great character. He's not explored as much as he could be, but he's such a good character because he's a terrible guy, but we see him through Matt's point of view, who, El Patron is not just his savior, which he is, but he's an idol. And he's also the only one who really likes Matt. And so you're like, oh, okay. And the other thing is that El Patron can be charming to an extent. He's charismatic, but there's also a great sense of narcissism to him, in that like it's made mention several times that like he thinks he owns everything in Opium, which is the little country. And like once he gets people, he doesn't let them go. They're his. He will do anything to keep them just because they're his. He really likes the idea of the pharaohs and like the I think they kept calling them Calandrian kings, who would like bury all their servants with them and all this stuff for the afterlife. And obviously he's like 140 years old, and he has, you know this essentially from early on, but like you're like, oh yeah, he keeps cloning people just so he can continue to live.
Continue
There's
living.
no plan for an inheritor. This is his domain.
It's really fascinating because in this moment, you as a reader are like, thank God Matt is going to, because Matt is intelligent, innocent, and she writes him as a child well, where he's smart enough to pick up things. Like he immediately knows a clone is something bad, he is a clone, and he's like, am I an animal? And he's trying to figure it out, and he doesn't have all the pieces, but he's trying. And so you really feel for Matt, and so you as a reader are like, and somebody mentions when Celia first finds him, Matt thinks he's hallucinating her, and it's just this really rough scene, and he can't, she's like, say something, mi vida, like I'm here, come to me, and he doesn't, he can't, he's in such shock, he's been so like traumatized by this whole experience, and he didn't think he was traumatized, and you realize in that moment he's like, I don't know why I can't go to her, like what is this, there's this like distance that he can't get over, and it's just so. But then he gets to El Patron, and El Patron is like, fuck all y'all for treating my clone terribly. And like, you know what is happening, but you're also like, thank God for El Patron, like, and yet Matt exists like this because of him and his self-serving nature, but you're like, thank God someone is allowing him to be treated like a human.
And I think it's so smart because it puts you in, it makes you identify with Matt, and Matt's sense of like, this is both a savior and a bad person. Part of it with Celia was she was like, he felt a little betrayed that she hadn't gotten him before now and stuff like that. And those are the little grace notes of character and complexity that this book does really well to make its characters feel real, and is missing in so much of the romantasy we read. Like those little conflictions of the soul, and how people think about things, and what a natural reaction is, and how they justify things, are here in a way that they aren't in other places. And that's something I'm gonna just keep talking about as we go, because it's so nice. The other thing is, I don't think you caught this because it's Spanish, but so Celia calls him mi vida.
Mi vida, and it means my life, and
yes,
Matt
and
is
so the
his
patron
life.
is like, that's funny. Mi vida is a very common endearment too.
And so he goes, I'll call you that, and you're immediately like, oh, that's terrible. It's terrible, because like for Celia, it's genuinely, she loves Matt. She loves Matt, and she's gonna go to such lengths to save him. And she's one of the best characters. But then El Patron is like, I'll call you mi vida, and I'm like, you ask, because Matt is literally his lifeline. Matt is the thing that's going to save him at some point when one of his little organs goes bye-bye. And so it's just like, it's such a smart use of the term. Because you do get the sense that he is very fond of Matt, but he's also very self-serving as a character. As a villain, he's just such a well-done villain. This book understands nuance.
Exactly, and that's the thing about it that's really cool. And it's something where, so like later, Matt starts to learn how to like play the piano, and they're like, oh wow, you're all really talented at that. And the Patron is so happy about that, because he's like, I had a gift for music that I was never able to use, because the Patron has this whole thing about his rags to riches story. And like, how he started with nothing and everyone died, and he's like, I never got to do it. And you're so like, oh, it's not parental, it's creepy, because he sees Matt, as an extension of himself. Which is like, again, it's a really nice nuance. And this part of the book is actually really nice, because there is this nuance to Matt occupies a really liminal place in the household, in that he is El Patron's favorite, but nobody else wants to be around the dirty clone. And so like on the Patron's birthdays, everybody has to say hi to him and be like nice to him, but otherwise they're like, no, and then they go back the next day to ignoring him.
And he exists, like he discovers music because there's this what's her name? Felicia. There's so Mr. Alagran is the guy who's mainly in charge. Like, Mr. Alacran and Felicia live at um in this hacienda. El Patron comes and goes. He has multiple houses, so they're the ones that are there most of the time. The kids come and go because they go to boarding school. And Maria and her sister are not part of that family. Their dad's a senator who comes and visits a lot. And so for the most part, it's just like there's no one there outside of the Mr. Alagran and his wife Felicia, who is super depressed. She's often
And an
hopped up.
alcoholic.
Yeah, she's an alcoholic and often hopped up on laudanum, but she plays music, and the way he describes it is like this violent outpouring of music, and Matt hears her and follows her into the music room. Oh, really quick before I do this, I have to back up a little bit. Matt still isn't talking for a really long time, and they're trying to teach him and get him lessons, and nobody will. And there's a term that keeps getting thrown around. Everyone keeps calling each other Egypts, and I just thought they were doing like a Irish version
Slang.
of idiot. But that's not it. Eventually, this lady comes in to teach him, and she's very stilted. She speaks really weirdly, and she has one lesson she does, and she keeps doing it. And his bodyguard, Tamlin, the one he picked to be his bodyguard, has to translate, like, has to speak for Matt. And after, like, a couple of days of doing the exact same lesson, like, this woman is doing one lesson over and over and over, Matt gets so upset and so angry, he speaks for the first time, and the lady just kind of collapses, and she can't, like, she starts almost malfunctioning, and you're like, at first you're like, is this a cyborg? Like, is this a not a cyborg, is this an automaton? You know, what is this? And he starts, like, Tamlin is comforting this woman, and, like, you were able to do the thing that we couldn't, and he eventually tells Matt she's an Egypt, and Matt realizes that Egypts are humans that have things implanted in their brains to make them act a certain way. And he experiences safe horses, which are horses that have an implant in their brains, so they only go up to a certain speed. They're very easy to control. They don't go past a certain boundary point. And he realizes this term that he's heard his whole life represents something. But for him, it's just like something that happens. The terrible servant who fucked with him when he was younger, Rosa, has been turned into an Egypt, and she works in the stables. And
I like this about Rosa is that you're like, because in the moment right after he's been captured, he's going up to the Patron after having been enclosed for so long, you're like, yeah, fuck you, Rosa, I want you to die, or whatever, like all that stuff. But then you see her later and she's an automaton, and like there's also the implication that like they're still in there somewhere, they just can't quite get out. And so you're like, and Matt himself is sort of conflicted about it, and then he's like, I didn't like her, but like, this is awful, and I liked that complexity.
And he had an Egypt teacher because no one else would agree to tutor him or be his teacher. And eventually he starts doing like telelearning, like online courses, and he does really well. He's super smart, and he like goes and he like hides around the house to experience things. And he hears Felicia playing in the music room on the piano, and he's fascinated. He loves the music, and he begins to learn the routines so that when Felicia goes off, he learns when the servants come and go, and he starts messing with the piano. And then Tamlin, I think, contacts El Patron, who gets him a music teacher, this guy named Mr. Ortega, who is deaf. And so he needed a job. He's a musician. And so he starts teaching Matt how to play the piano, and Matt does really well. And there's multiple points where Matt's like, but I'm smart, and I have good manners, and I have good grades, and I'm nicer than Tom, and why does everyone treat me worse? Like, what is this thing? What does it mean to be a clone? Maria comes back multiple points throughout the book. Again, you get this idea that for Maria, Matt is a bit of a pet, but she does genuinely like him. She just sees him as this other thing. Maria also has like huge, I don't want to say hoarding problems, but like she can't let stuff go. Her mother kind of walked out of her family's life when she was 5, and she thinks her mom is dead, and it was very hard for her. And so she attaches herself to things, and she has this dog named Furball. and years kind of go by. Matt learns him and Maria becomes friends, but then at one of El Patron's birthdays, which also gets to be Matt's birthday celebration, uh, Matt does a bad.
So this has kind of been building up throughout the his life up to this point, is that Matt has some not great qualities, and those are very much reinforced by El Patron's, like how he says you should live life and like how to master other people and like be in control. And so like he's like a little bit mean to people sometimes, and he looks down on other people. But I loved that so much because it's not the author being precious with the character and being like, oh no, he has to be a great person for us to like him. You always understand where Matt is coming from with this and why he's like a little shitty, and you're like, yeah, that makes sense. He's somebody in a disempowered and also dealing with his father is essentially teaching him to be all the wrong things. And like, I really liked that.
Ezra Industries says, I do like the nuance to the characters and that Matt is allowed to be a huge asshole because he's about to have, and it's the thing that this happens. Children are sometimes, like, nice kids can just sometimes have super asshole moments. Like, I think that's just human. And the fact that this author is like, yeah, we're gonna embrace this, and also because like he hates Tom, this is the one night of the year he gets to be special and people have to be nice to him, and Tom's been an asshole. Earlier on this day, Tom hid Furball in a toilet, or like the day before,
and he can't figure out why Maria doesn't like have problems with Tom doing this and why she keeps keeping Tom around and doesn't have a problem with him. And so he's mad at her.
Because she keeps forgiving Tom. Tom, like, one of the earliest things you hear before you meet Maria as a character is that Tom always makes Maria cry, but Maria always forgives him. And so when Furball goes missing, Matt very easily sees that Tom is not actually looking. He's helping look for Furball, but he's not actually looking. And eventually Matt finds Furball and realizes there's no way Furball could have gotten into the toilet and closed the lid on himself. Tom had to have done this. Maria won't listen, and she forgives him. When she walks into the birthday party, she's holding hands with Tom. And there's Matt, so angry, and just can't realize why Maria keeps forgiving him when it's so obvious to him that Tom's just a giant asshole. Tom is also really good. One of the things you get is that Tom is really good at seeming not like an asshole. He's an adorable looking kid who can play sweet real well. He gets mad, so he takes Tom's name card and puts him at the little kids table. And Maria's like, don't do that. Like, why are you doing that? That's so mean. And he was like, Tom put Furball in the toilet. He's like, why are you? And she's like, why are you saying that? That's not true. And she's like, don't put him at the little kids table. They have to eat mush. And Tamlin, who has become like a father figure to Matt and who is just really awesome. He's a great character. Tamlin's like, buddy, like, what are we doing? And he's like, no. And El Patron is like, good, mi vida. Get rid of your enemies. I love this for you. And so he's pumped up on El Patron's approval of this thing. And Maria's like, I don't want to sit next to you. And El Patron is like, well, is this your little girlfriend? And everybody's like,
a clone?
Mr. Alacran is literally like, or Senator, whatever his name is, Maria's dad is like horrified that this would even be insinuated, but nobody can say anything because El Patron is there. And he was like, she's like, I don't want to sit next to you, Matt. And Matt's like, you have to sit next to me. And El Patron is like, yeah, girl, you have to. And so her dad has to be like, sit next to him, Maria. And you're just like, oh God, Matt, no, my boy, stop this now. When the presents happen and he gets his presents, Maria has a present for him, but she won't give it to him. And she like throws it, and her dad is like, just give him the present, Maria. Just stop. And she's like, no, he doesn't deserve it. And he's like, and she's so upset about Tom, and he's like, why do you care about Tom? And he's just got like this anger and this resentment building up. And it's just such a real moment of when you go too far, especially when you're a kid.
And you're in front of a group of people and like there's all that pressure on you as well.
And El Patron is sitting there egging you on.
Yeah.
And there's this point where she does give him the present. Like she throws it at him and he's like, give me a kiss. And everybody stands still. And El Patron is like, abso-fucking-lutely. This is great. My boy Matt. And you're like, no. Like, this is not good. And Tamlin is like, buddy, let her go. Don't do this. And he's like, I can.
Tamlin has also had this thing throughout where he talked about how the Patron is like a tree whose who's grown tall, but his branches have grown twisted, and that Matt doesn't have to become like that. Limburg in the comments has talked about like how it's a study in nature versus nurture, and so like this is a moment where he remembers what Tamlin said about the branches, but he's gone too far. He has to keep going at this point.
And then there's this moment where everybody's disgusted, and he realizes, oh no, this is because, like Will said, he realizes he's gone too far, but he can't take it back without El Patron being upset, because now El Patron is like, yes, kiss him, and he's like, oh my god, I can't back out without upsetting El Patron, and he's not gonna do that because that's literally the guy who makes sure everything, he has that is good.
He is his
life.
only, yeah, he is the only thing that elevates Matt above any other clone.
And so he can't upset El Patron now by backing down. So then she does it, and he realizes it like immediately how much he's fucked up. Maria won't talk to him.
Well, it's interesting too is there's a toss-away mention that like, oh, they've kissed before, but this time it was like different. And like that's one of the things that's kind of nice about the romance in this book is that like it's real low key and it feels very much like a child like romance where it's like, oh, okay, they're kind of sweet on each other, but it also they don't spend all their time thinking about it. Like they are prepubescent.
He also says that like she kisses Furball a lot and more than she kisses Matt, and Matt wishes he got more kisses. But it's with the same energy she kisses Furball, she kisses him. Mm-hmm. But in this moment, there is something else here that makes it terrible. And Maria avoids him for a bit, and he's really upset by it. And then Felicia comes to Matt's room and is like, Maria's really upset, but she wants to talk to you. You should go meet her in the hospital, in the doctor's office. And so he goes, and then Maria's like, you had Tom come tell me to meet you here, and immediately alarm bells start going off in Matt's head. And he's like, oh no, what is happening? And Tom comes in, and he was like, oh, I want to show you something. And he opens a door, and they hear this mewling, this high-pitched wailing, and it's so rough. Maria thinks it's a cat that is being tortured in the hospital, and she's like, we have to go rescue the cat. And Tom's like, absolutely, let's go. And Matt's like, no, we should not do this. We should go back. We should tell someone. And he knows that something terrible is about to happen. And he also realizes in this moment that Felicia and Tom are working together, and he's never saw Felicia, this older woman who played the piano, as a bad thing. It's kind of this moment of realizing, like, just because somebody isn't outwardly terrible to you doesn't mean there isn't stuff below the surface. But they go into the hospital, they find the room, and Tom opens the door, and strapped to a hospital bed is a clone, and there's this character we've met named McGregor, who's like also a bajillion years old and like vibing. And prior to this, El Patron had not been doing super great, but then he started doing really well, and he was like, things were going great, and he's like, oh yeah, I got fetal brain implants, and McGregor's like, I should do that. And El Patron is like, you need to give the doctor, you need to get on it now, because you need to give the doctor 5 months, but 8-9 months is better. And you're like, oh no. And of course Matt's like, oh, I'm so glad the doctors have technology that can help El Patron. He's doing so much better.
And the portrayal of the clone is so low-key disturbing, and I don't know why. I think it's because you don't see it a lot, but you just get the sense for like he's just like all the time. He's like, not even really like an animal. He's like
contorted,
yeah, and, like, incoherent,
fighting, and almost like his body is spasming, and like not like the different parts of it aren't moving in unison, and he's just like yowling, and his eyes have this lack of something. And in this moment, Matt is like, oh, this is what everybody thinks I am. Everybody, like, this is what, and Maria is horrified, and she's crying, and in that moment, Matt thinks she's disgusted by me. She thinks this is, and he's like, no, that's not, and because they say, like, this is McGregor's clone, and as he's looking at the clone, he's like, wow, it looks like Tom. And they end up coming back to the house. He's so upset, he goes to Celia, and she explains that, yeah, that is McGregor's clone. And also, because he's like, why did it look like Tom? And he was like, well, actually, Felicia ran off with McGregor a while ago, but then El Patron got her back. and kept her here. And Tom is actually McGregor's son. And he's like, why would he keep him? And this is where you begin to see that, like, with Felicia, with Tom, El Patron does not let things go. He does not. People are things for him, and once he's decided you are part of his property, you don't get to go, because they're like, why don't they just, like, why isn't he with McGregor, like, um and so she explains a little bit, and explains that what happened to that clone was that his mind was broken, and that's how most, and that, but that doesn't happen to Matt. Like, El Patron doesn't do that. And in that moment, Matt begins to feel special, that, like, all other clones are like that, but he's not. El Patron wants something better for him. And he's still, at this moment, I think he's about 9, maybe 10, hasn't put together the problem. But after this, Maria completely avoids him. And what is actually happening, which you discover later, is that Maria has come face to face with Matt's fate. And because she knows, everyone knows what a clone is used for. And in this moment, because they know McGregor was going to have surgery, and the next time you see McGregor, a couple scenes later, he's doing better, and he's like, I got a new liver, and while I was there, I got 2 new kidneys. And everyone else realizes what's happening, and so she's kind of come face to face with Matt's fate, and she's not handling it well, and so she's kind of avoiding him, but he thinks it's because she's disgusted with him, and he's like, if I just explain to her that I'm not like that guy's brain has been destroyed, and mine hasn't, so I'm not going to be like that, and that I'm special because El Patron has taken so much, care of me, she'll be okay. So he devises a plan to get Maria to talk to him by taking Furball, keeping Furball somewhere, and then writing a note telling Maria that you'll get Furball back if you meet me here, signed Matt. And he takes some laudanum, because he knows laudanum can be used to knock things out. He takes some laudanum in case he needs to sedate Furball, but not, like, he doesn't want to give him too much. But he ends up not needing to. Once he gets Furball in the bag, Furball just goes to sleep, and he gives him, like, some raw hamburger. And he leaves Furball in this little, like, pump house. But when he goes out, he sees Tom in some bushes with some cranes, cranes? Yeah, cranes nearby. And he goes up to Tom, and he's like, what are you doing? And he sees that Tom has nailed a frog's feet to the ground so that the cranes can come eat it without it being able to run away. And he's like, that's fucked up. So he releases
Frog.
the frog, and Tom, like, has a moment of sheer anger. And then he, like, there's multiple times where it talks about how Tom is really good at hiding his emotions and immediately covering it, and he, like, flips a switch and he fucks off. He makes a mean comment, but then he fucks off. And then Matt goes to wait for Maria at the location, but then everybody's looking. Suddenly there's the lights are on, there's searchlights, and Tamlin finds him and is angry with him. And they're like, why would you do that? What is that? I didn't think that was in you. And he's like, what is happening? Where's I was just waiting for Maria. I was gonna give her back Furball. And they were like, yeah, dead. And he's like, whoa, why is Furball dead? And everybody's like, the laudanum bottle had your fingerprints all over it. And he's like, I didn't actually give it to him. I did take it. Nobody believes him. Mr. Alagran, or the senator, basically tells Matt, you will never see my daughter ever again. And they're shipped away. And Tamlin is a bit upset about the whole thing, but also he has to get taken with El Patron. El Patron decides to take him back, so Matt is going to be left to his own devices. And everyone believes Matt did this, but a lot of people believe it wasn't out of spite. And like
Or they
Celia
think it was
is
an
like,
accident.
yeah, Celia was like, you just gave him too much, like, it's okay, don't do that. And Tamlin's like, don't lie. Animals lie, rats lie, humans, we don't lie. Just own up to it. And which is like a great sentiment, except he didn't do it. And then this guy named El Viejo, who is Mr. Alagran's father and is El Patron's grandson.
But this whole time, you don't figure that out till like halfway through. This whole time, he's just been described as like this kooky old grandpa, essentially. And it's like,
Yeah.
no, it's him. And you had gotten this kind of sense before, but basically, he's dying. But religiously, he's against the use of clones, and so he dies because he won't get these transplants. And I really like that there was a certain amount of it's a good way of like a little note of world building, but it's also a way of showing different attitudes on things. Not everyone is a monolith in a culture. Like there are different currents within it. And it's such a nice contrast. But and what I also loved is that like his son still doesn't like Matt. Like it's not like he was like, "Oh, I am a good person, El Patron is a bad person, so our views line up with good and bad automatically." It's like, "No, I still don't like you. You're still not a person to me. I just don't think it's right to use you as an organ donor."
Organ donor. Um, and so yeah, El Viejo, the grandson, or is it great grandson? I don't remember, but
I think it's grandson because I remember
yeah,
being like, I thought it was son, and then I was like, no, grandson.
it is. I know it's grandson or great grandson because his actual son died previously.
Yeah.
Um, but anyway, and so El Viejo dies, and Maria and her family is going to come back for the funeral, and he's hoping to see her, and like Tamlin comes back and is like being nice to him because like Tamlin likes him. Also, I have to say that there is a oasis that Tamlin has taken Matt to at multiple points, and Tamlin is the only person that lets Matt do anything dangerous. Any bruise or cut is treated super seriously by other people, so they never want him to do anything dangerous.
And also, Matt is like, Tamlin's weirdly into surviving in the wild as a hobby. I
Yeah,
wonder what that's about.
yeah, because he goes to the oasis that Tamlin had taken after Tamlin left and was like, "Bad Matt." He goes to the oasis that Tamlin had taken him to through like you have to go past the poppy fields. Also, there's a great moment. We missed it, but I do want to bring it up. There's this moment when Matt is still young, before all of this has happened, where Tamlin takes him to the oasis for the first time, and as they're going through, he sees a man lying on the ground in the poppy fields. And Matt's like, "Oh, we should go." And Tamlin goes, but then comes back and is like, "It's too late. We can't help him." And Matt's like, "What do you mean we can't help him? We can just give him water." And he's like, "No, no, no. He's dead." And then he's like, "But why is he dead?" And this is the moment where what Egypts are really comes, like, hits home for Matt. And what it is that he's noticed that the safe horse only drinks when it is told to. And Tamlin explains that the Egypts that work the poppy fields can't, they, even if they're dying of thirst, they cannot go drink, and they will not stop working unless they're told to. And so Tamlin theorizes that this Egypt fell behind, didn't hear the foreman say stop working, drink, and just kept working until he died. And in this moment, Matt realizes kind of the horror of Egypt a little bit, and the man dying of thirst becomes something that plagues him in his nightmares for a while.
Lindbergh actually had a really good point. She said, I thought everyone assumed Matt killed the dog because El Patron would have killed the dog, and it was a nice nuance again. That's actually, I hadn't thought of that, but that is actually kind of an interesting, like, parallel there.
No, that completely makes sense. But so during the wake or the funeral for El Viejo, there's this point where the priest realizes that Matt. Oh no. Tamlin, when after he went to the oasis, he found a box filled with books, survival stuff, that Tamlin left for him, and Tamlin's like, "I got you, buddy. Read this stuff," and also a book that says "The History of Opium" by Esperanza something. And Matt tries to read it, but regularly is like, this guy talks, like, this lady talks badly about El Patron. She doesn't know what she's talking about. And, like, but he loves Tamlin, so he doesn't, like, throw the book away.
This is where we get a little bit of the backstory of opium, or dreamland as it's called also, which is that it's a very thin country on the border between Mexico and the United States. And the idea is that El Patron was like, hey, you guys don't like all these illegal immigrants, so I'll stop them from going across if you let me also grow drugs, and also I'll just send the drugs off to Africa and Europe and Asia, and like you won't have to worry about it here anymore. And like that's kind of that to me I didn't love. This came out in 2002, so it's like it's a different era. This is before like kids in cages kind of a thing. But even back then, you know, immigration was a big deal, and it just felt a little invalicious. It felt a little bit like, oh, you just saw something in the headlines and decided to write about it. But I think it works for me because it's not actually a massive part of the book, like illegal immigration as an idea, or, you know, Mexicans in America or anything like that is actually not a huge part of the book. It really does seem to have just almost been a bit of a jumping off point.
I agree. It's there, but it's not, like, harped on too much. But you definitely can tell a bit of the inspiration. Yeah, during the wake, so Tamlin comes back and is nice to him again, which he was kind of expecting because Tamlin left him the box of stuff in the oasis. And Maria comes back and avoids him at first, and he's kind of like shocked because I think he's like 11 now, and because she looks in her like black dress, she looks very beautiful. Um, and in the church, he's there with Celia. The priest realizes that Matt's a clone and tells him to get out, and everybody's like, no, 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 this is El Patron's clone. And he's like, that doesn't matter, blah blah blah. And then Maria's like, Saint Francis preached to the wolf, and the priest like he preached to him outside, and she's like, then so will I. And so she comes and she grabs Matt's hand, and she's like championing him, and they go out, and she's like, oh man, I missed you. And she like takes her hat off and immediately and ruffles her hair and immediately looks more like a little girl again. And they have this like kind of reconnecting, and she's like, I forgive you.
Yeah, that's what's great about it is she isn't like, oh, I was the one person who didn't believe like it would be in another book. It was like, no, no, no. I forgive you for what you did. You're an animal. You don't really understand. Peter's talked to the wolf. It's not Peter. You just said his name.
Saint Francis.
Saint Francis talked to the wolf and forgave him, and you're like a wolf. And Matt is like, okay, I didn't do it, but I'm not going to say anything because I just want her to like me again.
Yeah, he's so happy. He's like, screw it. And he's like, thank you for forgiving me. And they have this really nice scene, and then all of a sudden everybody is looking for them, and they need a place to kind of hide. So previously Matt discovered these like secret passages in the house that El Patron obviously used to spy on people, because there's peepholes everywhere, but also to get through the house unnoticed. And he takes her there, and they end up because she's really hot. There's no air conditioning, and Maria complains that El Patron keeps this place like his childhood memories, which again were like 120 years ago. And so there's no air conditioning, but elsewhere in the world there's air conditioning. And she's really upset, and he's like, oh, there's this one room that's kind of cool. So he takes her to the computer room that has all the security cameras. And while they're in there and they're talking, they're having this whole conversation, they hear voices and people come in. So they jump back into the passageway, and it's Tom and Felicia. And they're looking on the security cameras to see if they can find Matt and Maria, because everybody realizes Matt and Maria is missing. And they're searching because, again, Maria is not supposed to interact with him anymore. And as they listen, Tom and Felicia are being dicks, but Felicia, because she pans over and there's that pump room, and she's like, oh, remember this? And he was like, yeah, that's where Matt killed the dog. And she's like, no, Matt didn't kill the dog. And you're immediately like, because this whole time you like Matt we're like, it was fucking Tom. He saw him come out of this space.
He's a kid sociopath. He's hurt him before. He hurts frogs. Like, you idiot.
And then Felicia's like, it was me. I dumped the whole bottle of laudanum on the hamburger meat and then literally dropped the dog on top of it to make him eat it. And Maria just starts crying because she realizes, oh my God. And this is kind of a moment where you see Maria begin to rethink the way she thinks about Matt, because she realizes, I condescended to him.
Mm-hmm.
And he hadn't even done this thing. Anyway, Tamlin ends up in the tunnels and finds them and is like, listen, you two. Like, and Matt's like, how did you know? And he's like, of course El Patron told me about these tunnels. He's like, I don't know how you figured it out. But they basically hide Maria off in El Patron's room so that they can pretend she was there the whole time and take Matt elsewhere. And she's like, I'll miss you. She's at a convent now, as a boarding school. And she's like, I'll miss you. Bye. So she fucks off. More time elapses. Matt has outstripped his music teacher. He's doing really well. Things are going great. And, there was a point where he had gone to visit the Oasis and he was reading more of that book, and he went swimming in the water, which Tamlin always told him not to do. And he comes back, and that night El Patron has a heart attack, and Celia makes Matt drink something, and he smells it, and it's a little off, but oh no, it was a quesadilla. She made him a quesadilla, and he eats it, and he was like, is it off? And he was like, or is it just the water? But El Patron isn't doing good. He's having a rough time, a rough go of it. And Matt, they were like, he's had a heart attack, blah, blah, blah. And they go to find Matt, but he's violently ill. Like, he is throwing up violently, just a bad time. And this is the moment where you're like, oh my God, is Celia, like, poisoning Matt so that they can't use his organs?
Yeah.
And it's just this amazing moment because Matt's like, it must have been the water that Tamlin told me not to swim in, and I got sick from that. But you're like, that quesadilla tasted funny, buddy. we gotta put things together.
One of the things I love about Celia, going back, I think it was when she found him when he had been imprisoned for 6 months. And again, you think she's a castaway character. You think she's a character that's not going to show up. And she's like, at that moment when she had Maria help her figure out where he was, she's like, oh no, I'm going to get you out of here. I have a bag of tricks. And that's the thing about Celia, is like, she's actually very cunning. And her backstory is that she's from the village that El Patron was originally from. And she was trying to go into the United States, but she got caught. And El Patron was like, oh, you're from that village. Here, I'll keep you. Because again, El Patron is like just such a great narcissist.
Yeah, because he was like, do you have any talents? And she was like, I can cook. And he was like, perfect. And he's such a, but so like, Celia has a bit of a, like,
she wants to go home, but she can't. And she's very intelligent too. And yeah, no, she's a great character. And again, a character you don't really get to see respected a lot.
Eventually, things calm down. El Patron was given a smaller heart to piggyback on his heart. So he has his heart and this other one to help regulate his heart, which seems to have worked. And so you realize, oh, a younger clone got for this. That to happen. They needed Matt's heart, but Matt was sick. Matt starts to put together more stuff during this period, more stuff about clones. He's learning more. He studies the opium empire a lot and how to run it, because he's like, oh, El Patron must want me for something different. He must want me to like help him run stuff, so I'll make sure I learn that. But at the same time, he's still going to the Oasis. He's reading that book, learning a little bit more. And then everything comes to a head during the wedding of these two other characters that I'm not going to mention the name of, but there's a big wedding. Maria's coming back because it's her sister getting married, and he's so excited to see her. And like, this is one of those moments where you realize everyone just has this like real okayness with Egypt, because at the wedding, the flower girls are Egypt. And there's a point where Maria had been asking her sister, like, why don't you just use normal kids? And her sister's like, they can't be relied upon to make sure, like, the vision, I need my vision realized. Which is, like, such a bride thing to say. And so it's just, like, fucking terrifying. But anyway, the wedding happens. One of the things he learned that he's realized, before this, there's a conversation he has with Maria where Maria confesses that she's been set to marry Tom, because El Patron decides who the people he has access to marry so that he can join families together. So Maria's older sister marries one of Mr. Alagran's sons to join that. Benito, Mr. Alagran's oldest boy, had to marry a girl from Nigeria, I think it was. It was an African country. But Benito and Fanny hated each other, but they literally... Fanny had to marry him, so they like just drugged Fanny up through the ceremony, and she wakes up and she's married to this guy she hates. They still hate each other. And so there's this idea, like, Maria's like, at least Stephen and whatever her older sister's name like each other. And she was like, I don't like Tom like that, but maybe it'll work out. And at this point, Matt has realized that the woman who wrote the book that he's been reading, The History of Opium, is Maria's mother, who she didn't know was still alive. And in this moment, he tells her, in the hopes that when she gets back to her convent, she will contact her mother and her mother will rescue her. And that way she won't have to marry Tom and be part of this whole charade. But he realizes in that moment that he is essentially going to lose her, because she'll never be able to come back once her mother gets, because her mother hates El Patron and this whole empire. But anyway, during, I think, the reception, El Patron has another heart attack. The piggyback heart gives out, and everybody's searching for Matt, and Matt's kind of hiding. And then he remembers that Celia had told him to meet her somewhere, and eventually he gets found, and Tamlin has to act, not yet, he doesn't act like a dick, but he gets found and he gets brought to El Patron, and Celia's there, and the doctors did a test, and they were like, his liver functions are a little weird, and this other thing is a little weird, he's a bit anemic, but it should be fine to give him, use his organs. And they bring Matt in front of El Patron, and El Patron is like angry that Matt is upset because, obviously Matt has realized what's happening. He did a little bit ago, and he's silent. And El Patron is like, "Oh, it's like when you first met me. You're that you're silent like that." And El Patron begins to tell a story that he has told 100 times
I
about
loved this
how,
moment.
yeah,
It's so
it's
good.
such a good moment because throughout the story you hear a lot of El Patron's stories told over and over again, and he's telling the story about how his two little sisters died, and then each of his brothers, there was 8 of them, and each of his siblings died, and he was the only one that got to live to adulthood. And Matt is like so used to the story, and he's so upset with this moment that he's barely listening. And then at the end he was like, "I am owed those lives.
Yeah.
They were taken from me. I am owed their lives. They weren't able to live to adulthood. I shall live for them." And it's this like conceited, sad thing. And
It recontextualizes it because this whole time you're like, oh, that's his tragic backstory, and it's like, no, he is such a narcissist that, and again, it's like an understated narcissist, but like he thinks things are owed to him and he owns things, and I love that. It was such a nice little moment. And so he's like, okay, you're gonna go get harvested now. And Celia is standing next to him, and Celia goes, no, he isn't. And Patron's like, what are you talking about? She's like, well, I've been giving him a little bit of arsenic this whole time, and arsenic stays in the body, so you
yeah,
can't. It's okay for
yeah.
him because he's young and strong, but you won't be able to, it'll kill you. And all the doctors are like, oh no!
And they do a test, and it's true. He has arsenic, and so that when he had gotten sick because of the quesadilla, it was arsenic. And then she'd been doing smaller doses because Tam Lin had made a comment about how monarch butterflies, are poisonous, so nothing eats them. And she's like,
This whole time too, he's been like a little sickly, and she's been growing these vines in the yard. And there's this whole conversation between her and Tamlin that like he doesn't quite get. That's like, oh well, if this doesn't work, then we'll do that type of
yeah.
a thing.
And it's crazy because you realize Tamlin knows what's happening, and there's also this really nice relationship between. It's not romantic, but it's just really it's these two
Yes,
adults in a terrible world who love this child, who only have each other to make sure he's safe. And it's this like there's this one moment where Matt's like, "I guess I should leave," because the two of them are kind of drunk, and like Tamlin's drunk and Celia's like helping him, and it's just such a beautiful moment. And you in that moment realize they are trying their damnedest. Like Tamlin's plan is escape, let Matt escape, and her plan is I'm gonna poison him. And it's just this like beautiful thing, and everybody's so angry. And then El Patron dies, and they're like, "We don't need you anymore. We're gonna kill you." And he's like, "What happened to Celia?" And they were like, "We've turned her into an Egypt." And Tamlin has to pretend to be a bad guy, and there's this whole moment. And then he's like, "I'll take him. I'll throw him in the sludge pits of the Egypt pens." And he actually, of course, takes Matt to the Oasis so he can go off and do his thing. And he's like, Mexico is like 25 miles that way, make it there. And he's like, "Why don't you come with me?" And Tamlin's like, "I can't come with you. I've made it look like Celia is an Egypt, but she isn't, and I just like I can't." And something you learned earlier is that how Daft Donald and
Tamlin.
Tamlin ended up in this situation is they were Scottish radicalists, and they tried to blow up the prime minister's house, and it ended up blowing up a school bus of 20 kids. And that's how they ended up like in a terrible situation that El Patron got them out of and made them bodyguards.
And it's also why Tamlin can't ever go anywhere else. Is like he's wanted for
He's a
a lot of
wanted
child
felon.
murder. Yeah,
Um,
and this moment I think is when Matt like confronts him about it, and he's like, yeah, no, I mean the guy deserved to die, but and I didn't know the children would be there, but it's still what happened. Like
and
my carelessness killed them.
and so he's like, "I have to go back. I have to fix this. Like I have to do something here." And Matt's like, "Okay, I guess so." And so Matt goes off, and Tamlin goes, and this is the third act of the book where we leave the beautiful, like there's such a sense of place, and there's such like there's a
Claustrophobia and lurking
smell.
darkness.
Yeah, but also like there's moments of like happiness, and like there's a smell like the little bubble of happiness he had with Tamlin and Celia like are just so beautiful. And we leave the hacienda and we go to Mexico, which is, I forgot what it's called now.
Aztlan. So the thing about it is he has to make it over the mountains, right? And then he gets to the border. And one thing, I don't know when you quite realize it, but basically what happens is that some Mexicans are trying to get to America and some Americans are trying to get to Mexico because now Aztlan, Mexico, is doing better than the US in certain respects or whatever. But basically they have to get through opium. And those are the Egypts. The Egypts are the migrants who were trying to get through and couldn't. And so you're like, oh, that's fucking dark. And so when Matt is trying to get to Aslan, he has to get past the patrol of them, the farm patrol, and he like loses all the money Tamlin gave him and whatever. And he's taken in by this group called the Keepers, who are basically like I think somebody on the Discord described them as Maoist communists.
Yeah.
That's like very much what they are, though. They're all like, work is hard, but it's fair. And they basically run a child factory where kids from orphans are forced to like work a lot. And this is the part of the book that's just very YA. Because like it's very like there's a lot of kids together. He makes a friend. He makes friends with like one of the small kids and shelters him, and there's another kid who's like his best bro now.
Chacho and I forgot what the other kid's name is.
Fidelito?
Fidelito.
Fidelito. And so I was like, the thing is, if this was its own book, outside of the context of the first book, the first half, I would be like, oh, okay, this is actually, she's really good at writing YA because it feels way more YA is the thing. The first half didn't feel necessarily like it was written for children. It felt like it was written from a child's point of view.
Yes, it almost felt like, you know, the book The Room. I don't know if you've read it, but like it got turned into a movie.
I'm familiar with it. Yeah.
Yeah. It almost felt like that kind of thing where it was a larger adult story from the point of view of a child who doesn't know what's happening, and like almost like it could have been literary fiction in a sense. And then this does feel more YA, and I'm again, if it had ended with him leaving the estate and then this book and then exploring it and like him getting older and everything, I think it would have worked. But it is a very different tonal like shift because it's still dark, but it's kids, these like Maoist communist adults, and because there's a moment where it almost feels like he did it, he made it, he got there, and then it ends up being a terrible situation.
Again, this is a situation where she creates a biome, and it's an interesting biome to explore, but we were so interested in the other one that, yeah. And the thing is, the other big problem is that nothing here really contributes to the ending of the book. Like, you could just skip all of this and you wouldn't, in terms of a character arc or emotional arc or even really the logistics, have much. So it's just like a side quest. Like, it's just a U-turn.
I think if it had been done, one of the comments Will made when I was talking to him about this morning was that if it was something where Matt came out different at the end of it, or he learned something, or there was like an arc to be followed, like I almost would have preferred it if this was a second book. The first half was this, and then the second half was them trying to integrate into the rest of society and it being better, but there still being problems, and him coming, like, this was the moment where he realized, no, what is happening there can't stand, I need to do something.
Or even that he doesn't fit in this new world, that he is too much a child of the hacienda to leave it. I thought that was going to be kind of interesting, but it's not that. He actually, like, he makes friends, and like there's some action adventure stuff.
There's a pit of whale bones, and like the thing is, she's great at making these, like the plankton factory is just terrible. All of these kids that are just covered in like cystic acne, and it's really like, again, they're child laborers. They go to a new location. It's a plankton factory. They're fed plankton burgers, plankton burritos, plankton pasta, and it's a terrible situation. And everyone hates Matt initially, outside of the kids, but the adults hate him because he's smart, and he also just looks and feels like an aristocrat. He has like he's out of time. He's got the manners of someone from like 120 years ago.
He tried to talk like the Patron, but the Patron's 104 years old.
And there's also like this moment where they ask a question and he thinks it's a genuine like dialogue of like questioning, talking through ideas, and it's not. They don't want new ideas, they don't want stuff. And he also, like, his idea of like Egypt and stuff like that, and so he gets labeled as the aristocrat, and the adults kind of hate him for it. and are trying to break him, and his friendship is what they with the younger kid Fidelito is what they use to kind of uh control him, because they realize they can't really do anything to Matt that he cares about, but they can threaten the young kid. And Matt's like, I shall make an escape plan. And this is again a moment where you see her nuance. There's this character named Tonton who originally you're just like, this guy is just like a lackey for the adults, but he's being used badly, and he's one of those things where like initially he's described as a slow character, but like he's smart. It just takes him a second to get there. He just has to like figure it out, and they end up making a friendship, and they escape this terrible situation, and they go to the town where Maria's convent is, which is where he's been trying to get to the whole time. And it's the Day of the Dead, and they use that to kind of disguise themselves. But the one kid, Chacho, gets injured, so that he has to go to the hospital. And so they go visit him at the hospital, but the keepers are there, and they're trying to take Chacho. They've captured Tonton, and the nuns are like, no, you don't get to take this kid. If you move him, he'll die, because he got trapped under a bunch of whale bones. And they're like, we're gonna take him anyway. And the nuns are like, no, murder. And Matt's like, you'll have to get through me. And so then a brawl starts out, and the nuns are like, no violence. This is a convent. And then a lady walks in, and she's older, and she's very imposing, and she's like, what is happening? And he looks, and he's like, oh shit, that's Maria's mother. And she's like, what's happening? And the keepers from the like child factory are like, oh, these kids, they ran away, they did a revolt, because like Tonton drugged the adults with laudanum, trapped them in their place where the kids just put salt bags all around, and then they like skedaddled. But eventually these guys got out. And so he was like, yeah, they did this whole thing and they're bad. And the lady's like, so you're not caning kids? And they're like, no, if the kid's bad, maybe he goes to bed without dinner for a night. But no one gets caned. And they were like, and there's no pit of bones you throw children into when they're not listening. And they're like, the stories boys tell themselves, it's fine. And she's like, so you're not how laudanum and drugs are getting into this country? And they were like, absolutely not. And she's like, you want to do a drug test? And then the police come in, and she's been like, yes, I've been waiting to take these motherfuckers down for ages. And Esperanza is just this very like driven woman who's like less of a mother than she is like an activist politician. And then Maria comes, and she's like, oh my god, Mom, it's Matt. Matt's here. And they heal up. Matt heals up, and eventually Esperanza and Maria come to him and is like, listen, since you've been gone the 3 months, opium has been in lockdown, and nobody can get in and out. The drugs aren't going anywhere. What is happening over there? And he was like, well, lockdown, doesn't that happen sometimes? And they were like, yeah, but only for an hour or two, like, never for this long. And they were like, Maria's like, I'm worried for my sister and everyone that's there. And Esperanza's like, I don't give a shit about any of that. I want to take this down. And apparently there is a legal loophole, which is the law says that clones... It's so dumb. This isn't how it should have... So dumb. But basically, the law says there can't be two people with the same identity and DNA. So one of them is labeled as a livestock and cattle to be used. But now that El Patron is dead, technically, in this law loophole, Matt is El Patron, so he can just take his place and can be in charge. So her plan is to go in, instate Matt as the ruler of opium, and have Matt completely disassemble the entire structure and existence of opium. And Matt,
and she's like, and stop all this poison running into our countries. And I'm like, oh, God, do we need to talk about the drug war and how, like, this is one of the ways that I don't think the book is a very good commentary on immigration and Mexican-American relations, because it just doesn't grapple with that at all. But the thing I did like about it is that it's kind of realistic that she's a good person to the most extent, because she is like, there are activists in the real world who do value other people and minorities and stuff like that. But you also get the sense that like, how much does she really care about Matt versus achieving this goal?
And same with her daughter. There's the sense that she is a political activist first and a mother second, and that her love for individual people is smaller than her love for society as a whole. And I find that very realistic, that is often how people have to function in those positions. And she just felt, because again, it's nuance. She's not an entirely good character. You don't look at Esperanza and be like, oh man, I want to sit down and hug her. You know, Matt is kind of terrified of her a little bit. But anyway, and he also, there's a chance he's gonna die on landing. And they were like, it's a chance we have to take. And Maria's like, I'm really worried about my family. And Matt's like, oh, God damn it. For Maria, I'll do anything. So he goes into the land, like he goes into opium. He has El Patron's DNA so that that allows him to land during the lockdown and not get shot out of the sky. And there's no welcome party. People aren't around. He ends up going into like the kitchen, and Mr. Ortega, his music teacher, is sitting there, and he taps him on the shoulder. No, he's playing music. He taps him on the shoulder, and Mr. Ortega like freaks out and runs off. And then eventually Celia comes and finds him and is like, Mi vida, like, what are you doing here? What's happened? And he's like, what the fuck has happened? And you get a scene that I really wish we would have seen in scene and not as a secondhand. And basically, the day Matt leaves, the next day is the wake / the funeral. And everyone goes. Celia is supposed to be in Egypt, so she doesn't go. Mr. Ortega doesn't go, and Daft Donald Daft Donald goes. But so Daft Donald is the one kind of. Celia tells the story. Daft Donald is giving some feedback, and there's also this great moment of him realizing he always just assumed Daft Donald was like just kind of dumb, but he had lost his ability to talk, and he can type on a computer, and was actually like, you know, a human, even though like a fully fledged human being, even though Matt didn't think of him that way. So there's these great moments where you see that even Matt has holes in his ideas. But anyway, Celia basically tells him that they go down to the, like, he doesn't get buried in the mausoleum. He has like an underground cavern filled with all his riches that they get taken down into, and some of the bodyguards are putting some gold in their pocket. And they put him in this, like, almost sarcophagus, shut the lid, and then Mr. Legrand is like, here's the wine that is from the year of his birth that he wanted us to drink at his death. It was supposed to be for his 150th birthday or at his death. So that everyone pours a glass, and Tamlin tells Daft Donald, don't drink it. But then everybody else drinks it, and they die. This man was ready to
Egyptian pharaoh style.
Take out his entire family and make sure everyone he considered his was going to die in there with him and be buried there. Like, just, and which is like, he told us this previously, but you're like, holy crap, what the heck? Anyway, Daft Donald didn't drink it, so he ends up going out, but he also, like, El Patron, like, blew up the entrance to his mausoleum, so you couldn't get, like, he just, like, and he just planned to take everyone into it. There was an explosion. But they've just been surviving. When that happened, the lockdown got triggered, and it's just been like, they've just been stuck like that, and they haven't been able to, Celia, Mr. Ortega, and Daft Donald haven't been able to get a message out to anyone and let them know what's happening. But basically, Tom's dead, Felicia's dead, like the rest of the cast just blew up, or not blew up, but got poisoned, and they're all dead. And it just sucks because Tom is such a good, like, I felt like it was such a unsatisfying ending for Tom as a character. But also, this is such a cool scene, and it's just told as a retelling of what happened. And you're also like, oh my god, Talon's dead. My boy!
But you find out in flashback, essentially. This should have been a scene. And one of the things is that it made me realize one of the strengths of an author who won't be named, because I don't want Maria to have to get drunk in her new house, is that Martin, from A Song of Ice and Fire, is really good, because he was originally a TV writer, at creating these really cinematic, powerful scenes that are built up and are part of the, like, a release of tension, you know? Everybody talks about it, like the Red Wedding, for example, is one of those scenes. And this is like, if that happened off screen, I would have loved to see this happen in Matt's point of view. And it should have. We didn't need this whole Aztlan keepers, like, mini sojourn for, like, I would have paid for this scene instead of all of that shit. Ezra up here had said that structurally the book is kind of a mess, like no real rising action, no real climax. Yeah, the climax happened while we weren't here, and there was no rising action for it.
It's so bizarre, because this is the climax of the book. It's insane that this is how this was handled, and that we've been off in a, because like it just feels like so anticlimactic. Because again, you get there, Ortega, Celia, and Daft Donald are literally just in the kitchen having a good time. People are cooking and living. So there's no tension of danger or anything. You immediately know that they're fine. You hear the story and you're like, what is happening? And we've just been off on this weird adventure in Aslan. Like, what is this? It's such a weird decision. And basically, Mac's really upset about Tamlin's death. And she's like, listen, he had a lot of guilt about what he did, and this is how he saw he could bring down the empire. And Lindbergh makes a comment which I'm going to highlight. I didn't entirely feel Tamlin's guilt and shame that would lead him to make this decision. It seemed to me like he could have lived with a purpose. Instead, he needed to die to be a lesson, and that's the problem for me with it. There's a couple moments where the author's hand shows. Number one, with the weird loophole legal thing. Like, I would have been more okay if he was just taken, like, I would have been more okay if Esperanza found him and was like, I can use you to get past the security. And
I thought it should be most of the operation had to be run through his DNA. Like,
yes.
or like, and like that was the big thing, is that actually he's the key to this whole little empire.
Yeah, and they needed him to, like, disable all of this so they could then do it. But this whole, like, you get to be the Lord of Opium now, like, legally you inherit it, like, is just crazy.
Yeah,
and
I didn't like that.
And it feels like the author's hand showing. And again, there's easier ways, and like, I like the idea of him being part of a rebellion group, you know, and like being like, we have to take this down, and him being the one like, we have to take this down. But anyway, and the book ends where he goes back to the Oasis and he's thinking about everything, and he's like, okay, now I have to take down Opium. And there's a moment where he's kind of thinking through his experiences, and he's thinking about Celia and he's thinking about Tamlin. And the one moment that did get me was he's sitting there and he sees across the fire Tamlin telling him, like, you can do this, like, you got this. And that got me. Like, him seeing Tamlin and having that conversation, I just I cried.
Yeah.
It got me, because I love Tamlin, and it just felt like such a terrible ending, and like, for him. And so then to have this moment of like the catharsis of seeing him, it got me. But the end itself is like, and also I don't really have interest in seeing him dismantle the thing, because again, it starts getting too concrete. The magic of the first 2/3 of this book was the sense of that paraboliness, that sense that this was like a weird liminal world.
Yes, and through his viewpoint. And so if it's not like that, then see, about halfway through this book, I was like, oh, we're gonna read the sequel for next book club. Like, that's for sure. I'll see if people like that idea or not. But like, I really want to read the sequel, and I don't really want to read the sequel now, because like, I feel like it's not going to have anything that of what I liked from this book in it. And I liked the parts of this book I liked. I don't want to get that to be further ruined.
And it's just kind of the magic of this book is those small interpersonal, like that micro to macro thing. And the development of relationships and point of views changing, and the like, the steel within people in these terrible situations. And I like the idea of just the image of Opium collapsing in on itself, just as this beast finally dying, as El Patron dies. I don't need to see it. I don't like, once you talk about dismantling, that's work. You need a bureaucracy. That's a macro.
It's a different kind of story.
Courtney Lovett just said, now it becomes a macro story.
Exactly.
And I would have just loved is as he sit there at the Oasis, it was a flash, maybe, like, if this was just one book and it was a flash into the future, like, we got rid of the whole, like, kids part, or had that as a second book, but he comes back and you get him at the Oasis and he just talks about how Opium just collapsed and disappeared, almost like, or like, there's a thing about 10 years later and it's almost like it didn't even exist. It was this thing that was transient, but held alive by one man's will and one man's force. And when he died, the entire empire died because his twisted branches weren't there to hold it up. And I like the idea of it just dying like a beast letting out its last breath. I don't want to hear about us butchering it afterwards.
And I mean, the thing is, theoretically, it is interesting to have a story about like what do you do after the evil empire is gone? Like, how does that work? Because in real life, it's very messy. But that's a macro story, and that's not really what I found interesting. And also, he killed a lot of the interesting characters. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, all of the family of El Patron like is gone now, and it's like, okay, we spent all this time building them up, and they just died off screen. So I don't know. I really liked this book, and I really liked the first half, and I don't even think the back half is that bad. I just think
It
it.
isn't.
I think
It's
it's
just disappointing.
unsatisfying after the first half.
Some people are talking about the second book that I want to highlight. Um, Ezra Industry says other Otter, there is more because Angry Otter had asked a question. There's more about Tamlin in book 2. It's just kind of a cop out. Angry Otter says, okay, yeah, I think the plot structure being so strange makes the two books blend together. Ezra Industry says book 2 is very similar to book 1 when it comes to structure, which is to say it has identical issues. Lindbergh asks, does Matt grapple against himself and his bad inclinations in the sequel? Question for those of you who have read it. Ezra Industries, no, not really at all.
Here, Chris M said, the backstory of Farmer's process is actually included at the end of the book. I wish I'd read that then. I didn't know. I just kind
Yeah.
of stopped listening at the end when they put on that cheesy music. I hate when they do that in audiobooks.
Yeah, Angry Otter says book 2 is very much more of the same. There's some danger from people trying to get into opium and take over. The sequel, Ezra Industry says the sequel is even more of a mess. Honestly, I just listened on audiobook while I was doing other stuff or I would have been annoyed. Angry Otter says, yeah, I listened to the audio. It's basically Matt trying to figure out what to do with this terrible place that he's now in control of.
See, I do feel like that could be interesting, but the second half of this book doesn't tell me that it's going to be.
Ezra Industry says there's probably like the most interesting character in book 2, and then he's kind of dropped out and done nothing with.
So I mean, I think overall, again, a good book, very listenable, but I don't really want to read the sequel now.
Yeah,
because I'm just kind of
the
like,
ending really takes like the air out of the balloon, I guess. Like it kind of crashes because
deflates it.
It deflates it where it almost feels like it should have just been a standalone. Like and that the actual collapse of the empire is not the important part. It's just that it does happen because the terrible man that held it up is gone.
I think the other thing is we lose track of Matt's story. In the first part of this book, this is Matt's story, and what does all this mean to him? Because again, this is about what does this mean to Matt, not what does this mean for this empire. And so when he doesn't really have any character development in the second half, you lose track of it. And it sounds like in the second book, it's really not about Matt anymore. It's really about this world.
I probably will still read it because I just want to see. Angry Otter made the point. I enjoyed it. I was glad it got a sequel. It's not bad. It's just not better than the first book at all. So I'm interested to see what happens, but also if it's a matter of the farmer having a hard time keeping track of the genre feel of it, because again, the first 2/3 is a very different genre feel than the last third, and I wonder if that's a little bit with that as well. And maybe if I do read it, we'll do a Maria's sequels thing.
She's been talking about doing that for a year and a half, guys.
I know.
It's not
crazy.
gonna happen.
But anyway, because I am interested in to see how it goes. But overall, I would say this is definitely worth a read. There's a lot of interesting concepts here, and it's just like her writing is just good. Like it's a good time.
It reminds me of like a little bit darker of a Diana Wynne Jones, in that they both kind of have the same, like there's nuances to their character. They're actually good at like world building. There's all these little things that work about it.
And there's a power of place.
Yeah, there is. And again, there's just all these like they understand how people think in a way that so many books don't, and just where they just make their characters broad. And I really appreciate that. And so, yeah, I would definitely check this book out if you've stayed this long here. I would also check out her other book, The Ear, the Eye, and the Arm. I remember that being quite good. We probably won't do it for the channel ever because there's no reason to just tank a video automatically based off of its premise.
This was one of the most enjoyable reads I've had for the podcast in a while. I am currently reading Shogun because we're gonna do a video on that. And in the second half because it's split into 2 books. Everybody's like, Maria needs her own thing. Maria time. Okay.
Her own thing is her life. That's the thing me and Katie didn't have. So
Now that I live with my boyfriend and I don't have to like go see him
in
and like
sin,
actively hang out in sin, indeed, unwed. God forbid. I should actually have more time to give to like other stuff. So because I would like to do it. Don't shake your head at me, William.
all right. We love you all, our parasocial darlings.
Bye.